Welcome to this second lecture on entrepreneurial thought and action. In this lecture, we are going to see some very important topics and we are going to explore these two questions. How do entrepreneurs make decisions? Have you ever wondered how an entrepreneur makes decisions? Do you believe that entrepreneurs think the same as we do? Or do you think that entrepreneurs actually have a different approach to decision making? In the second question that we are going to explore in this video today is how do entrepreneurs intend to act? How do entrepreneurs will execute their decisions? But before moving on into these topics, so let's recap a moment what we have seen in the previous video. So in the previous video, we addressed 4 academic theories of entrepreneurship. So we have seen the entrepreneurial characteristic. This was an older theory. We have seen the entrepreneurship impact on the economy, labor productivity, and so on. And third, we've also analyzed the entrepreneurship process. And finally, we start seeing the entrepreneurial behavior and thinking. And we are still in this part. So we are still in the part of entrepreneurial behavior and thinking. And what we are going to see today is specifically how entrepreneurs make decisions and how entrepreneurs behave and take actions. Let me also recap on the McMullen and Shepard framework, which we analyzed in the past lecture. So in this framework, we have seen that entrepreneurs are able to detect opportunities in the market from a third-person perspective, and then they are able also to match these opportunities with their own experience. And this leads to the topic of today. So the way entrepreneurs think will be in a first stage to realize that there is an opportunity for someone, and in a second stage, to determine if this opportunity is for the entrepreneur himself or herself. And this is the foundation of entrepreneurial thinking. We can break down the way entrepreneurs think in 4 ways. The first one is to think structurally. The second is to utilize do-it-yourself, also called as bricolage. The third way that entrepreneurs deploy is effectuation. And the final one that keeps all the other 3 methodologies together is to be able to cognitively adapt, cognitively adaptation. So let's take a look at the first one. So what is structurally thinking? So this is a typical way entrepreneurs solve a problem. So differently from the traditional approach to problem solving, what entrepreneurs are able to do is to perform some mental leaps. Mental leaps from technology to market opportunity, or the other way around. So from business perspective to a technology innovation. So to perform these mental leaps, entrepreneurs generally use either superficial similarities or structural similarities. So superficial similarity means that entrepreneurs are able to see, for example, in different geographies, in different markets, they are able to see some similarities, and then they will, let's say, import these similarities into their own market. So this is a way entrepreneurs think structurally. Another way for entrepreneurs to think structurally is through the identification of structural similarities. So in this case, entrepreneurs are going to detect the underlying mechanism of a technology or the underlying mechanism of a business model, and we are going to match them together. So this is obviously a more complicated approach, but it can be equally successful. So I know that think structurally may take some time for learners to grasp this concept. So let me give you two examples of structural thinking. So the first one, as you can see in this picture, comes from our almost everyday life now, which is the pandemic situation. And this actually was an experiment that was done in Italy at the beginning of a pandemic in 2020. So this was the first wave of a pandemic, and the healthcare system was hit by this virulent infection wave. And there was obviously a shortage of machines to help people breathe, people infected with COVID to properly breathe. And so since there was this lack of ventilators in ICU rooms in hospitals, as they were overwhelmed by people infected with a virus, so one solution that was found out was to use scuba diving equipment for people with respiratory problems. And this is an example of thinking structurally. So as you can see, these are completely different industries. One is like water, sports, the other one is healthcare, but still scientists, researchers were able to adopt this entrepreneurial way of thinking and to basically adapt the scuba diving mask to the specifics of a patient with COVID. So this is an example coming from the healthcare industry. The other example that I would like to share with you is from e-commerce in education. So probably you are aware that in the past 3-4 years, e-commerce has become a dominant player in retail, and especially in China, that is really at the forefront of e-commerce. We have seen some very important development of e-commerce, and one of them is live streaming for e-commerce. And I would say for this, China was really the first one to launch this trend of live streaming in e-commerce. And what happened a bit later on, in the past 2-3 months, so some education technology companies in Thailand, such as New Oriental, that is one of a market leader in education technology, so they start adopting exactly the same business model. So they utilize e-commerce live streaming with English lectures embedded in the live stream. Obviously, I mean, this pivot of the business model of New Oriental and all the other education technology companies and private tutoring companies in China was due to a change in the regulation, which we are not going to see in the lecture today. So this was an external factor to this change, to this pivot of a business model. But what I would like to stress here is that education technology companies adopted a very successful model from e-commerce, and then they adjusted it to make it relevant to their industry. So again, from an outsider perspective, you may even be surprised to see that there are tutoring companies doing live streaming, e-commerce, and they are selling products and at the same time teaching English. But this was actually an example of think structurally and a very huge success in the Chinese market. So moving on to the second way entrepreneurs think. So this is the so-called bricolage. Generally, entrepreneurs live and operate in the scarcity of resources. And so entrepreneurs need to use all the means that they have at hand. That means, like their own asset, their intellectual capabilities, their network, the people they know, their own experience, and so on. So all of this is defined as bricolage. So let me give you an example of of Bricolage. So the example of Bricolage comes from my personal experience. So this is the case of an entrepreneur in Myanmar, in Mandalay. I used to teach in Myanmar and do also some consulting project in Myanmar in the past 5-6 years. And this experience was from, I think, around 2017, 2018. So let me also share a couple of pictures. So you see one photo this is one of the conferences that we organized in Myanmar, in Mandalay, with our local partner. And so back then he was in the education business, in the academic business, and he was operating a private university in Mandalay, in Myanmar. So the curious thing was that this private university was actually located in the same building where he had his own tea manufacturing and tea distribution business. So it was kind of curious because you got into this building and there were like an area with people working in the tea business, and then other floors were dedicated to the university business. And you can see this entrepreneur just right next to me in the photo. And then what happened in Myanmar in 2017 and 18? So back then Myanmar was growing very rapidly, almost 10% year on year. And there was a huge demand of education, a huge demand of English language education and so on. And so what this entrepreneur did, so he added one more revenue stream to his business. So he had already the tea business, he had the academic business. So then he added also kindergarten and primary school business. And this is the second photo. So basically in a month or so, he completely added this new business line. He opened a kindergarten, he opened a primary school. And every time I was going to Myanmar for teaching or for other projects. So there was, a new class and new kids around, and everything was exactly in the same building. So when that building became really crowded, so with the tea business in one floor, the university in the other one, and then during the week when there were no classes at the university lecture halls became kindergarten halls. So there was, a bit of confusion over there. But this is exactly an example of bricolage. So he had that real estate, that building. He had experience in education business. He had partners, and he utilized all of this to make his business happen in extremely rapid way. So in a few months, his business was up and running with kids everywhere, university students, and the tea trading business. And he utilized also his friends for the marketing, as you can see from the photo. So every time that I went there for teaching my MBA classes, then he asked me, okay, take some photos with the kindergarten kids, because parents will love to see the kids with some foreigners around, and that will make, especially in a city like Mandalay, where foreign expatriates are really, really, probably you can count them on a hand. So it was really exotic. And I'm bringing this funny story to you because it's really an awesome example of using bricolage, so any type of resource for creating a business. So let's move now to the third way entrepreneurs think, which is the effectuation process. So here I need to add one tiny theoretical framework on the way people, and especially business people, managers, generally think, which is the so-called predictive logic or causal process. So generally, managers will think in terms of desired outcome. And this is the typical predictive logic process. So you have an outcome, you prepare a plan to achieve exactly that outcome, in your thinking process will always be a cause first leading to an effect. Then there is the effectuation type of process. So the effectuation type of process leverages on the bricolage. So building upon what you have. So who you are, who you know, what you know, and so on. And then to select among possible outcomes. So in this way, you are not only aiming to achieve one single specific outcome, but you are open to multiple possible outcomes. Any of them is fine. This is, again, a typical way for entrepreneurs to think. So also in this case, I would like to share with you an example. Imagine to be in a cave. You are in a tour, you are visiting a cave with a tour guide and other people. Also, let's assume that you had to leave your smartphone at the entrance of a cave because it was forbidden to have a smartphone with you. And let's imagine at this point that the torch utilized by the tour guide suddenly breaks down and everything is dark. You can't see anything. You are in a cave. You don't see your friends or your families. It's incredibly dark. And now your challenge is, how can you get out of a cave? So I think some people will scream if you are in a cave. I would be terrified because there's generally like weird animals like bats in a cave. So I would be terrified. Some people maybe will start running and that would be, terrible, right? We will fall down. Some others probably will not move. Some people will try to get a fire or something. But there is probably only one way to get out of a cave. In this way is probably to go on all fours and then trying, little by little, baby step by baby step to explore around, to find the walls and the ceiling, and then you will try to get to the entrance. Slowly, but with baby steps, but with resilience, with persistence. And this is an example of effectuation mindset. So you use what you have, your resources, your ability, your physical strength, your intellectual abilities. Maybe you team up with your friends to create a human chain or something. And then you just start exploring by taking baby steps. And this is exactly what I'm going to show you now. A baby, a toddler. How do we learn to learn? And this is the problem with causal thinking. This is the problem with predictive logic. Toddlers, children, little children do not learn the way we learn. Toddlers generally learn exactly like when we are in a cave. They will go around taking baby steps. They will probably taste everything in their mouth. That's typical of kids. So all of these are examples of effectuation process. So one clarification. I'm not saying that you as future entrepreneurs or future managers, you should always only use this effectuation mindset. That is basically the foundation of a more creative way of thinking. So in some circumstances, obviously, the more traditional predictive logic, the causal thinking it's obviously a very good way to frame a problem, but it's not always the case. And this is what entrepreneurs teach us. Entrepreneurs are able to deploy this effectuation thinking to achieve possible outcomes, not only one limited single outcome. And the fourth way entrepreneurs think is the so-called cognitive adaptability. So the cognitive adaptability is essentially a way to help us being good at effectuation. So we can summarize cognitive adaptability as the extent of entrepreneurs to be flexible, dynamic, to be aware of the way they learn. So being aware of the way they learn means that they are also able to reflect on how they make decisions and how they take actions. Cognitive adaptability can be broken down into 4 areas. The first area is comprehension. So understand a problem, identify an opportunity. The second one is connection, which means to find the resources, the people, the team to exploit the opportunity. The third one is strategy, how to be successful in the business. And the final one is reflection. And ideally, entrepreneurs are able to create a feedback loop, and by having this feedback loop, they will reflect on what went right, what went wrong, and they will eventually improve, pivot, change, react. So all of this is very peculiar of the entrepreneurial mindset. So the ability to sense, to adjust whenever they see that circumstances, the market, or even a previous strategy is not working out as they planned. And so this leads to a main distinction that we need to do between the management way of thinking and the entrepreneurial way of thinking. So managers will think of resources in terms of what they need to achieve a specific outcome. This is predictive logic, as we just learned. Managers will think of risk as possible reward out of a risk. If I'm taking a risk, what can I get out of this? And in terms of a team, a manager will mostly think what people can do for them. And generally speaking, the managerial way is to learn first and then to take actions. So learning is aimed at taking actions. This is not only the managerial way, by the way. This is how we have been taught in school to think and operate. We study, we learn, we understand, and this is because then eventually we will take some actions. But on the other side, there is the entrepreneurial way. So we have seen that through Bricolage, Effectuation, entrepreneurs think of resources in terms of what I have personally and in terms of my asset. Risk, what I'm willing to risk, what I'm willing to do, what I'm willing to spend. And in terms of people, how can I gather people, not only my team, but also like partners? Remember my Myanmar friend asking me to take the photos with the Burmese kids? How can I get people along with me? And in terms of action, entrepreneurs will act first in order to learn. And that's why rapidity is essential in entrepreneurship. Fast pace is an essential component of entrepreneurship. So adding on this, the distinction between learning in order to act or acting as a way to explore and learn. So there are some questions that you can ask yourself. You can see here. So do you focus on the reason you can't? Do you wait for the right moment? Are you constantly worried? Do you avoid feedback? Do you trust conclusion made by others? How do you gather information? How much do you wait to get a verification, a validation before you actually try? So all these questions, all the list of questions are a way for you to evaluate whether you are more of a manager in terms of thinking or whether you are more of an entrepreneur. So you can do this little exercise, you can answer these questions and realize whether you are more into the management type of thinking, predictive logic, or you're more into the entrepreneurial mindset, what we define as a creative logic. What is the conclusion? What is the implication of entrepreneurial thinking? So obviously, the implication of entrepreneurial thinking is to have an intention to act entrepreneurially. This is what the entrepreneurs want. So they think entrepreneurially, but what we really want to is to execute this, to take the actions. So we have emphasized a lot on this. Entrepreneurship is taking actions, not only thinking. And when it comes to take actions, so there are two very important factors to remember. One is the self-efficacy, the entrepreneurial self-efficacy. That basically means what is the conviction of the entrepreneur that he or she can successfully execute that behavior. And this is very important. Let me stress again, conviction. So it's something in the head of the entrepreneur. So this idea that he or she can actually make this happen. If you don't have this conviction, it's very difficult that the plan will go as you expect. And the second important factor to remember is the desirability. So whether the entrepreneur really wants to take the action, whether the entrepreneur really wants to make that business become a reality. So in conclusion, I would like to throw on the table a few questions for discussion. So something that can help you reflect on what we have analyzed in this video on entrepreneurial thinking, and specifically on the 4 dimensions of entrepreneurial thinking. So thinking structurally, bricolage, effectuation, and cognitive adaptability. And I would like to encourage you to use this entrepreneurial mindset in everyday life and in the current context. The current context is very dynamic, is changing so rapidly. In the past 2-3 years, we have seen a pandemic disrupting our way of living. We have seen a spike in commodities. We have seen an incredibly high inflation due to policies of central banks over the past years. We have seen conflicts happening in areas where we probably did not expect to see these heavy conflicts happening. So all this entrepreneurial mindset is required also in everyday life, not necessarily only when you start your own venture, but also to live, to make decisions in a highly volatile world like the one we are living. So my questions are, for example, why this entrepreneurial approach can be relevant during the current crisis. And you can pick the crisis. energy crisis, food crisis, inflation crisis, conflict crisis, whatever. How this can be relevant. Secondly, how does this concept of entrepreneurial thought and action can apply to you as a learner? How can you control things through the entrepreneurial thought and action? Or actually, can you control things in this way? Because probably, as we have seen, entrepreneurship is not much about controlling things. Entrepreneurship is more about choosing among possible outcomes. And in your everyday life, or your university, or in your workplace, how would you practice this entrepreneurial thinking in your teams? Can be a sport team, can be a university team, can be your with your colleagues in your company, in the workplace. And then let me pass the word some assignments, but these are not really assignments. It's just something that can help you easily practice more of entrepreneurial thinking, and can be even just a very small change just to get used to, get familiar with the idea of thinking entrepreneurially. What would you do today or tomorrow, tonight, to act more entrepreneurially? And what would you do differently next time when you are watching this video, or when you are in the classroom, or when you are in your workplace, or you're working with your teammates? So just think about this. What changes, what actions would you take to implement more entrepreneurial thought and action in your everyday life, in your job, and in your career as university students? Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video. Bye!